Katharine Birbalsingh, welcome back to Dad Saves America.
Hello, John. Nice to see you.
So, this is a very special episode of Dad Saves America because it is in part a kind of announcement to our audience about our collaboration.
Yes.
We together have launched a new channel starring you called Strictly Education. And it went live in June, but it really begins kind of now when this video is going live. So why don't we just start off with why you want to get what you do at the Michaela School, which we talked about in our last episode and we'll link to, out to the broader world. Why is it important for parents, for teachers, for possible school principals and people who influence the way schools work to hear what you have to say?
Yeah, well, frankly, it's anyone who's interested in children. And I think that Strictly Education is about putting children on the map. I find that in far too many conversations that we all have, we forget that children are 100% of the future. We kind of wonder why 25-year-olds behave as they do, or we wonder why our young adults don't know anything, a whole variety of things. And it's pretty obvious to me because they went to school. And it doesn't matter if you're in America or Australia or Britain or Canada. I find this is the case across the Western world. Our schools are similar. Our parenting is similar. When I say our parenting, I'd say there's far too much gentle parenting going on instead of the sort of old-fashioned values that our grandmothers all used to know. And, I'm trying to bring the traditionalism that used to be perfectly normal back into our worlds when it comes to children and bring children into our conversations about anything because children matter. And I think we often forget that they do matter.
All right, I'll keep this quick. If you like what you're hearing and want to hear more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our new content as it comes out every week. And now, back to the conversation. So one of the things that, and we're going to go into a lot of depth about your philosophy this time, because for those who are tuning in and don't know you, we did an episode a couple of years ago where we went into a lot of detail about the school. And I have since spent last Thanksgiving sort of embedded at the school with my son and came away with an even deeper appreciation about the school. But one thing that people should know. So first of all, go over and subscribe right now to Strictly Education, dear viewer. And secondly, some of you that watch this show might not realize is that Dad Saves America is part of an organization called Emergent Order, which I founded 5 years ago, and whose premise is to do exactly this, to try to get the ideas that I believe and that our whole team believe matter, and the people that I think should be trusted to hear from about this. And you are very much like the first one to expand the roster, so to speak. We started with me, partly because I knew I wasn't going to quit on myself. I wasn't necessarily setting out to even be on camera, so that's always been a little weird. But the reason why I wanted to team up with you is because I agree with everything you just said. Why did you want to team up with me? Why trust
you know what,
me?
John? The thing is, John, so when we first met, as you know, we were at the first art conference in London and I had spoken and you came up to me and you were very kind to me and very nice and said how much you liked my speech and you liked what I was saying and so on. And you were very excited. And, you were like this puppy waving its tail and just all excited and saying, oh, I've got to tell you about what I did for my son. And these are the various schools that I put my son in. And I, being the way that I am, immediately shot you down and said, well, actually, you've done terrible things for your boy. All those schools you sent him to were awful. And the little puppy stopped wagging his tail. and then I felt really terrible. And so I had to then say to you later, I'm really sorry. But look, the fact is, what is amazing about you, John, is that you're willing to change your mind. And you and I have been talking for years and we've disagreed obviously about things. And, I think, partly you were already changing your mind about stuff when it came to education and with stuff, the sort of thing I was trying to persuade you of. But I really managed to do it when you came to see Michaela, and you came and saw our school, and you turned around and sort of said, "Oh my goodness, I understand what you're saying now, Katharine." And the thing is that we get 1,000 guests every year to the school to see what we're doing. And they are mainly teachers from across the Western world. This isn't just British teachers. There are people who come from Australia and New Zealand to see our school. I mean, it's a long way. Now, everybody comes and they see it, but it's only 1,000 people. Mm-hmm. And then the people who come say, "But you've got to spread the word, Katharine. You've got to tell other people." And I say, "Well, I'm trying my best." But the fact is, tweeting, going on X and sending out tweets, or, going to the occasional conference, it's not enough. It really isn't enough to get the word spread as much as I would like to. I feel like I'm a bit of a traveling salesman. And the thing about doing a podcast is that it allows anybody who wants to hear about kids. And I would stress for your viewers, this really isn't just for teachers, and it isn't even just for parents. It's for anybody who is interested in children. So if you're thinking about the various culture discussions that we have online about what sort of works in terms of politics, philosophy, all that sort of thing, you've got to imagine Strictly is a channel that's all about the same sort of ideas. It's just that it's always being told from the point of view of children. And I just want to put children on the map, because too many of us just we don't consider them. And when we think about school, we think to ourselves, well, I'll send my kid. Now, you were really involved. So you were really interested, and I'm going to send that kid. I'm going to send my kid to this school and that school and so on. Most parents aren't like that. Most parents choose a school. They think it's all right, and they sort of cross their fingers and send their child along. And if their child is struggling at algebra or science, they hire a tutor, and then they get him through, and they don't really understand the impact that a school will have on a child. Frankly, I don't even think they understand what the impact they will have as parents on the child. And so I want to get people to realize how important children are and how important we are in their lives as adults.
What do you think is the least understood thing about why your school matters for those who have had some exposure to it? Because one of the things that, so just to set the table for the new viewer, your school, well, why don't you set the table? So just a brief reintroduction of what Michaela is and what you've accomplished with it in terms of the performance of your students relative to the other schools in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, so we set up in 2014. I suppose it's like a charter school in America. It's a similar sort of idea. But you guys have had charter schools since the 1990s. We only started them here in 2010. We opened in 2014. So when we first started trying to set up, which was at the end of 2010, there was a lot of pushback, a lot of people trying to stop us. It took us many years to try and open, and eventually we did. But the difference, I suppose, we're not in charge of our admissions. So the kids that get given to us are given to us by the local council. And we're a normal inner city school. So you come to the school, you're in an old office block. We don't have any trees or fields or sports, arena. Like, we have nothing. And yet when you come inside the building, you see wonderfully polite children who are really kind to each other and interested in learning and determined and resilient and all the sorts of things that anyone would want any child to be. And you don't really expect to see that in the inner city, which is why people come from far and wide to come and see here. I've had teachers break down in tears, visiting teachers, because they cannot believe that these kids, who aren't that different to their own kids, are behaving the way that they do. So I always think of us as a bit of a show pony, that it's possible to see this. It's possible to do this with children. So, every day I speak to the guests, at 1:00 at lunchtime. They've had lunch with the kids, and then I gather them up downstairs, and they ask me various questions. And everybody's always asking very similar questions. And it just strikes me, gosh, it'd be so easy to kind of get this out there if I could, because on the internet nowadays, you don't have to be in person, right? And you, John, well, you believe in us. And you like what we do. And you believe, it's like your organization called Emergent Order, that I I suppose the idea is, I don't know, you and I have never spoken about this, but I've always imagined that the idea is that order can emerge out of organically, when groups of people get together and decide to do something together. And
Yes.
yeah. And that's precisely what you see here at Michaela. There was a group of teachers who thought, oh my goodness, the whole system is failing. How can we do things differently? And that's what we did. And, we've now been open 12 years. Our results, yes, as you say. So the progress that we make with the children here has put us at the top of the Progress 8 chart, is what it's called here in Britain. And it's been like that for a few years. I mean, people come from far and wide. But what I would stress is that our results, while they are impressive, and they really are impressive, it's not the thing that I always talk about, because the thing that is most impressive about the school is who the children are as people.
And now a quick word about this video's sponsor, Masa Chips. Now, I have eaten a lot of tortilla chips that claim to be natural, and they either taste like cardboard or aren't so natural after all. When you flip around and look at the ingredients, you see all kinds of horrible stuff. But that's not true of Masa Chips. These things are great. And when you look at the back, well, you don't see that much. No seed oils, no mystery chemicals, just real food you can feel good about putting in your mouth. These actually taste incredible. And I'm not exaggerating. Because they're all natural, with Masa, you could finish off a whole bag and actually feel pretty good after. And I know this because I've done it. These are actually my favorite. The Hatch Chili. These are awesome. The problem is, now that I've opened this, I'm going to sit here and eat the entire bag in one sitting. That's because they really are great. It tastes like real food. And of course, you can find it where real food is sold, like Sprouts Farmers Market, Wegmans, Target, Whole Foods Market, and many more locations. Ready to give Masa a try? Go to masachips.com/dad, D-A-D, and use code DAD for 25% off your first order. One thing to know, because Masa uses real ingredients and makes everything in small batches, certain flavors go out of stock regularly. I just finally got my hands on Hatch Chili again after it's been sold out for a couple weeks. Again, that's masachips.com/dad and use code DAD for 25% off. Or click the link in the video description or scan the QR code.
And the thing is, you can get any child to be like this. You really can. And so for all those mums and dads out there who are struggling and thinking, oh my goodness, my child is always misbehaving, what do I do? For those teachers out there who are thinking my classroom's just crazy and chaotic, how am I going to get them to behave? For people out there who look at the kids on the buses and in the streets and think, oh my goodness, we've lost control of our kids, what on earth is going on?
The teen takeovers among the various things in the U.S. that make some of us feel like the world is collapsing around us.
That's it. And and often, we hear these terrible stories of things that, people do. It tends to be with young people. It tends to involve people under the age of 30, right? Now, what people don't understand is that 25-year-old 7 years ago was at school. Like that's no time at all. So we opened 12 years ago. So the kids who were here, well, they're now adults. They're the people who are going to vote. They are the future. And I think we need to be taking children a lot more seriously. Look, the fact of the matter is that, once upon a time when women stayed home, so I'm not suggesting that women should stay home, and I'm just saying when the vast majority of women were
Most
at home.
will ultimately want to if they listen to themselves and what they want out of their lives once they have kids. I will just speak on behalf of every woman I've ever met, by and large, with a handful of exceptions.
Yes. I think
no
that's
one
true.
tells them that's okay.
Yes.
I'm happy to say that's okay. It's probably good.
Yes.
Don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
Yes. No, indeed. I would agree. But I'm sort of not having a dog in that fight. I'm simply saying that it used to be the case that 50% of the population, i.e. women, used to be in the home. And their identities were shaped around their children. So 50% of the population thought that children were the most important thing ever, right? That's how it used to be. because
Yes.
their whole identity was about that. And so that's what they spoke about. And that's what they taught. Like they spent all of their time and energy on that. That's no longer possible. And sometimes people feel that financially they're unable to be at home and so on for whatever reason. So like the fact is that that's no longer the case. And that means that children are a bit of an add-on often because families are busy working, families are just trying to survive. And there's nobody and there's no group of society that has children as their number one focus, apart from teachers. And I would say, unfortunately, too many teachers are a bit misguided, I'd say, about what's required in the classroom. I think some of them are fine, but I think too many of them are misguided about what's required to do well by children in the classroom.
One of the things that Jordan Peterson had talked about a couple of years ago, that I'm curious what you think of, because it's sort of, you're alluding to it, is that, we see in our politics today, young women, particularly young women who identify as left or progressive, first of all, have the highest degrees of mental illness, like measured in terms of actual things that you could diagnose, like cutting, and it's really horrible. As a father, I don't have a daughter, but I know what it feels like to have children, and so I know what it would feel like if my daughter was doing that to herself or feeling depressed. But the politics of young women in general has become actually far more radical than young men. We don't talk about this quite enough, that actually the differences aren't symmetrical. Women have become far more radical than men. And one of the things that Jordan talked about was that the nurturing impulse might be simply being redirected from children to the current thing.
Yep.
To Gaza, to the climate, to the planet, to some, frankly, impersonal abstraction for which their actions have no impact whatsoever, and they might just even be fundamentally wrong about their beliefs top to bottom. But regardless, it's some abstract cause that now has and you see this recently, there was some horrible incident in Germany. And my Twitter feed includes, because it's a bunch of right-wingers, includes a bunch of tweets of young German women, often with colored hair, talking about how the reason why this Islamic migrant did something horrible is because of, something Mad Libs progressivism, like masculinity or something. Yeah. Do you think that that's true? Do you think that that's a part of what's going on, a misplaced motherly instinct to nurture and to protect the weak?
Yes, absolutely. I do think there are biological differences between men and women. And I think that women are naturally more nurturing. Now, that doesn't mean all women are like this, and clearly there are some exceptions, etc. But and it's funny because people often think of me as not being particularly female, because I'm really gung ho and I say what I think and I'm quite disagreeable and I'm fighting for things and so on. But actually, I think I'm just a bit like a big mama bear. I love kids. And all of my nurturing and energy goes into children. And my staff are like my children in a way as well. They're all much, much younger than me. And I feel like I'm a bit of a grandmother. I'm not even like their mother. I'm like their grandmother. And they come and see me and ask for advice about a million things. And I look after them, and it's, I feel a real sense of responsibility on my shoulders, like a mama bear would, and that's because I have given all of that female energy and nurturing, as you said, and the empathy that comes with that to children, which of course is what women used to do. I think you're right, or Jordan is right, Jordan Peterson is right, that if women don't have that opportunity to do that, then they might seek out other abstract causes that they can do that with. I think kids are a great thing to put your energies into. I think that, you see, unfortunately, because children are seen as women's work, right? I think a lot of people don't respect it. I think a lot of people think, well, they're kids. It doesn't really matter, Whereas they are the most important thing that in the world. I mean, what's the world going to, what's your country going to look like in 20 years' time? Well, it all depends on what you're doing with your children now. Nobody seems to understand this. And then everybody's shocked when things are happening now the way they are. But I'm not shocked because I've been in the school system for 30 years. So, yeah, I also, I'm whistleblowing a bit as well. So, I'm just trying to tell people what's going on in our schools and what's going on in our homes with our children. Because people don't even realize themselves what's happening in their own homes because they think that's normal. And they don't realize that 25 years ago, things would have been very different in your home and your own expectations. People have forgotten that their own parents, what they expected of us, is very different to what we now expect of our children. If somebody needs to do the job of telling everybody what our grandmothers and grandfathers knew instinctively, right? So somebody needs to do it, and I'm going to do it.
So we both spoke at ARC, which was it was not a surprise to see you speak again, and I met you there 3 years ago. I was super honored, frankly. I was excited to do it, but your speech just took off like a rocket. So not just on the ARC's YouTube channel, but I have seen it reposted endlessly. I'm sure you have as well. It's gotten clipped like crazy. And one of the things you said in your ARC speech was that a mistake that we make as parents today, particularly, I'll hone in on Gen Xers and young and older millennials who are now having kids in the range of school time.
Yes.
Is we think that we can look to our parents, boomers and great and older, who could have been somewhat, I don't want to say neglectful, but didn't need to put so much intense intention into being parents. And we turned out fine. I think about my own childhood. I would go off to school. I would come home. I would spend basically the rest of the afternoon outside with no tracking device. Yes. And even though my mother's kind of, a protective, slightly neurotic South Philly Italian mom, she was fine with that. And then the sun would set and it was normal life.
Yeah.
You're in your speech, you say, that's not the world we live in anymore. And we can't, as parents, think that we can have a sort of like presence and benign neglect and have it work, that we have to be more intentional. We have to take seriously that this is a much harder, much different challenge to raise kids that will actually be like us. Like, let's just assume you're a conservative-minded, relatively traditional person with healthy habits of mind and body, with a job, all the things you'd want to be an adult. You gotta think of your parenting differently. So to elaborate on that point, what exactly are we getting wrong?
Yeah, well, I cannot tell you the number of mums and dads who I have met who are small c conservative, like you and me, in terms of the way that they think, and they can't understand why their teenage child, could be anywhere from 13 through to 19 or even 21, 22, a little bit older, why their child thinks totally the opposite. Their child thinks that they're a bit of a Nazi. Their child, they feel slightly awkward to ever say anything around their child because they know they're going to get accused of racism or hating Muslims or whatever it is. And they feel that their relationship with their child is a little bit estranged and they don't know what to do about it and they don't understand how this has happened. And it happens all the time. Now, I think it will happen less so in places like Texas because, well, you guys in the States, because you have these very different states, you've got your blue states and your red states. If you're in a red state and if you sent your child, let's say, to a Christian school and you have kind of looked after that environment that your child is in, you might be okay. I can tell you in Britain, it's very different. We don't have states like that. So everybody's just together. And I think
there's no escape from the woke progressive culture.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So you guys, all those people who were moving from California to Florida and so on, like we don't have that. There's nowhere to go, So the thing is, I find that a lot of small c conservative families are really taken aback and surprised at what then happens to their own children because they assumed that their children would grow up in the same way that they did. And that isn't what's going on. their children are forever changed.
So beyond the external, their peers in their school, what are we doing as parents to set up our kids to become weird Jacobins that hate us? Like, what do you think? Because that's the one thing that you get as a teacher and as especially as the headmistress of your school, you're dealing with all these parents. Now, I think your student body in some ways has an advantage in my eyes in that, and this may clang for some of my viewers, but your school is like predominantly North African immigrant families, right? Or at least it's a large portion of it are sort of immigrant brown and black kids.
Yeah, but like from everywhere. So like, there's a lot of Somali heritage kids. There's some Indian heritage kids. There's, North African, as you say, variety like Morocco, etc. Middle Eastern. Then there's Caribbean. There's African. There's Nigerian, Ghanaian, Jamaican. So, but yes, they are all brown and black, basically. I mean, there's a small number that are white. And the white ones tend to be sort of Polish heritage, Eastern European heritage.
Yeah. Why I said that's an advantage is that what some people who maybe haven't encountered this, but these populations won't necessarily appreciate and should, is that everyone you've described, I think there's like an average cultural conservatism in those families, especially if mom and dad is present. And that if there's a documentary about the school that really kind of hones in on some of the families, and you get to see this in a rich way. And we're going to, of course, re-release the film on your YouTube channel. These are like exactly the kind of immigrant families that I think most, that Americans kind of understand. You come here, it's like my great grandparents. They want their kids to learn to work hard, keep their nose down, have grit. There's one family in the documentary that says, like, if we can't get our daughter or our son into Michaela, I guess we're going to have to send him back to Africa because they don't want him to be exposed to the sort of cultural corruption of the schools.
Yeah.
Do you think that's actually helped you to build a culture that's very traditional at the school?
Well, some of the families are like that, but remember, the thing is that because we are considered to be like a normal public school, the families are not like in a charter school in America. The families need to choose that school to apply to outside of the normal system. Whereas we get lots of kids here who haven't necessarily chosen us first at all, or even second or third. So we have a whole variety of different kids. We have some families that absolutely love us, that have chosen us number one, and they want us for all of those traditional values, etc., as you say. And then there's other families who just happen to live around the corner, and so their child comes to the school. So we really have a real mix. And also what I find is immigrant families so you've got first generation, are different from those who might be second or third generation, right?
That's true, yeah.
Because once you've been in the Western world a bit longer, I'm afraid all of those desires of hard work and perseverance and being grateful for what you've got and all of that kind of disappears a bit. It just does.
It is something that, and I think it might be more intense in the UK. Konstantin Kissin has pointed out on a couple episodes of Trigonometry that I guess there's stats in the UK that in Islamic populations that the second and third generations are starting to actually be more fundamentalist than their parents or grandparents that came to your country from Muslim countries, presumably because they didn't want to be in that Muslim country they were leaving. So why do you think that is?
Well, it's unrecognizable. I mean, the thing is, because they're brought up in a culture of victimhood. So I talk about that in my ARC speech as well. I mean, The fact is that if you bring children up to feel a sense of grievance because of these terrible things that Britain has done, if the schools are teaching your children to hate the country, well, then we shouldn't be surprised that they hate the country, So when we turn around and say, how come all our 25-year-olds hate the country? Why are they all going on these marches? Why are they all desecrating the cenotaph, etc.? Why are they attacking Churchill, his statue? Well, Well, it's because we told them that Churchill was this big racist and that he's a bad man. So if we've taught them that, then of course they're going to attack his statue. The thing is that it doesn't make sense to them. They're wondering, why have we put the statue up of this racist man, right? And all of us Gen Xers and boomers and so on are looking and going, but this is the great Churchill. We're only a free country thanks to Churchill. And all of our young people are saying, but he's a racist. He's not a good guy. So there's this disconnect. And the problem is that we older millennials, Gen Xers, boomers, all look a bit confused. And I always think, well, I don't know why we're so confused. We're the ones that taught them that. But it's because we don't care about what's going on in our schools, you see. We don't take that much of an interest. We send our kids to school and we just kind of shrug our shoulders and think, oh, it'll be fine. And that's because we imagine that school is just about getting some good results so that you can get a good job. We don't understand how much schools socialize children into the adults that they will become. And the main reason, I would say, we are struggling as a nation, both in Britain and in America at the moment, with our culture, with society and the way in which we're behaving, well, it's because of the way in which we've been teaching our kids for the last couple of decades.
How do you understand what culture is? We use this term culture, and I think it can mean different things to different people. A lot of times it'll be used and it's just talking about like art. That's obviously like a very thin read of what culture is. What does culture mean to you? And you can include just even the culture of the school, how you've cultivated the expectations and the behavior of the people at your school.
Yeah. No. So if you want to know what I'm doing all the time, in my job, I'm managing the culture of the school. And I am making sure that the culture remains the way I think it should be. And that's really, really hard. And any good leader should always be considering culture over strategy. They say culture will eat strategy for breakfast. That's the expression. It's 100% true. What matters is culture. So what do we mean by culture? How do people work together? Are they friendly with each other? Are they kind to each other? Do they help each other out? Are they teamly? Do they work as a team? Does each of them put forward their best ideas? Do they hold each other to account? Do they deliver on time? Do they respect each other? That's one culture. There are other cultures which are a lot more backbiting, angry. People are resentful. There's a sense of grievance all the time where they're annoyed about not having got that promotion, not having been respected, etc. So there are just different cultures. That's a culture.
That latter culture, I think, is properly understood to be one that's infused with a lot of small p politics.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so that, your viewers will understand in any organization that's the case, but that's also the case in a country, right? And it could be a country, it could be a city, it could be a town, it could be a village, it could be a school, it could be a family. What does the culture feel like? And who is in charge of that culture? Because there's always somebody in charge. And so you take a classroom. My position is that the teacher should be in charge of the culture. But I can tell you, if the teacher isn't in charge of the culture of that classroom, then one of the kids is. And all you need to do is find the biggest bully. Find the one who's horrible. He's the one, I say he, it could be a she, but likely to be a he. He's the one who's in charge of the culture in that class. And what's happening every time you're in that classroom is the teacher is sort of in a tug of war with that kid, wanting to get back the control and get back the culture of the class. But she can't get it because he's got it. And when he speaks, everyone looks to him and follows his cue. And when she's saying, I need silence, she can't get it because he is the one holding the puppeteer strings for everyone else, Now that's once you've been a teacher, and if you've been a good teacher, you know culture like the back of your hands. And it's the same really when you're in leadership. When you're a teacher, you're a leader of that classroom. And when you're a leader in a school, you're a leader of the school. It's the same in any organization. It's the same in sport. All of the football managers in the World Cup recently, soccer for you guys, each one of those managers is managing the culture of his team. And in order for that team to be successful, You've got to have a great culture where they're helping each other, being teamly, supporting each other, being kind, going out of their way, sacrificing something when they want for themselves, but for the sake of the whole, they sacrifice. It's interesting with football, actually, when you watch kids playing football, so playing soccer, when you watch a good, like kids at school, because football is like our big sport here, so everybody plays soccer. And when you watch groups play, the better groups are the ones who can work as a team. They pass to each other. The ones who aren't so good at that, each one is chasing the ball because each one wants to get the ball to be able to score because they want the glory. That's what they want, right? As opposed to thinking, no, the team needs to win. Therefore, I'm going to sacrifice when necessary. I'm going to defend because that's my role. And I'm going to let the strikers go out there and win those goals for us. Yes, they get the glory, but the whole team wins. Now that is something, for instance, that, you should learn as a child. That's where, as an example, childhood is so important. You learn those sorts of rituals when you're a child and it becomes habitual for you to think in that way. Then when you're older, you make a great team player when you're in any organization, as working as an adult.
As a matter of just practical advice, that scenario you're talking about, that classroom that's being dominated by the loudmouth boy or girl, and therefore, like, they've become the leader of the class, and the teacher maybe is even trying to rein it in and can't. What's your advice for the teacher, and to some extent parents who are in that situation in their house, for reining them in and for bringing order to that chaos? Because one of the things that in a firm you ultimately have control over is hiring and firing. So when you have a member of the team who is not creating value and disrupting others and putting their own interests ahead of like the actual purposes of the business, you ultimately fire that person. But a teacher, sometimes you have to kick them out of your classroom. Oftentimes, maybe you can't. And I think a lot of times probably you shouldn't. So what do you do? What do you do there? You got the loudmouth disruptor, and they've turned your classroom into a clown show. What happens?
So it's interesting you say that you shouldn't. I think it's the number one thing you have to do. So it's like at home. If your child is misbehaving, you need to put them out on the naughty step. If your child is misbehaving in the classroom, you need to get them out of the classroom. And then, you see, because if they're out of the classroom, and that's why the school leaders, the principals and the head teachers and so on, need to make sure that they have a system of behavior in the school that allows the teachers to be able to remove a child from the classroom. Now, because at that point, you're then able to get the rest of the kids on side. And you're able to give the kids work, teach them, they feel confident, and they feel happy. They then do some work, they feel successful. And what they learn in that moment is, oh, wait a minute, you mean if I listen to the teacher and I do the work, then I get clever and I get to be really good. Oh, I like this. I'm not so sure I want to listen to so-and-so who's just left the room, actually. I want to listen to the teacher. So the more you can create a culture of that, of success going on, the more likely you are to get the rest of them on board. Now, the one who's been sent out, that one, well, you need to have a one-to-one conversation and you see whether or not you let them back in and you tell them, here are my standards. This is what you need to do. If you don't do this, then I will ask you to leave. And then you ask them to leave again. And then you ask them to leave again. Eventually they will fall. I mean, they do. They all do. You know what? Wanted to show you this. In fact, this is exactly what we're talking about. So one of my teachers made this for me. He drew this, which is so nice of him. And he's put me in this gladiator outfit because I've got Maximus from Gladiator, big cutout statue in my office. And he's wearing the same armor. And he's put hold the line here. Now, the fact is that that's what you're doing when you're sending the child out of the classroom. When you're putting your boy on the naughty step, you are holding the line and you're not going to budge from that. If you say, well, I feel bad, I'm not going to send him out, you're not holding the line. Whenever in doubt, you have to hold the line. So just like the Roman army, when they're going out to battle and the barbarians are throwing their arrows and they go out, and all of the shields, at some point the arrows come, and you see this wonderful scene where all the shields come down, they bend down, all at the same time. And then all the arrows bounce off the shields because they're all one team and nothing can get past those shields. So it's the same here. You have to be somebody who is consistent as a mom, dad, or teacher. You've got to be consistent all the time, always holding the line. Because once the child knows that you will always hold the line, well, they'll try for a bit. They'll try it on, obviously. But in the end, what are they going to do? They will fall. They will.
Yeah, that's great. This was one of the lessons. It's funny because I do think of you very much as the super nanny for school. And my wife and I watched that TV show, Super Nanny, the tough British woman that comes into the homes. And basically her lesson every time was hold the line. That was it. It was like, oh, your kid's a brat. That's because you let them win.
Exactly.
Put them in the corner. Exactly. And be on the same page. And so we did that. And one of the ways that we did it, I should really say mostly one of the ways my wife did it and made my son into not a barbarian, but an actual good person is when he would act like a lunatic.
Yes.
She would put him in the corner and also just generally, more subtly, deprive him of attention.
Yes, indeed. Because that's what they want. And that's why you got to take them out of the classroom, because suddenly they're not getting attention anymore. Everyone else isn't looking at them going, "Ooh, wow, I think you're really cool." The teacher is not giving attention, because when you get annoyed with them and then you get into an argument with them, they're getting all the attention that they want. You remove them and say, "No, you're out." Well, then what? They've lost, right? And if that's what you keep doing to them, you're out. Right. Okay, next time, right, you're out. Next time, you're out. They're going to stop misbehaving because they want to be in with the group. We are group animals. Nobody wants to be removed from the group.
That's great. Yeah. As usual, I have my impulses where you're like, that's wrong. Why is it that isn't, it looks like, I think that's become like the thing not to do is to remove them or to remove them quickly. And as I'm thinking about it, it's like, you're right. It's like that. The cost of keeping the disruptor in, every minute that they're disrupting minutes times the population of the classroom. So if there's 30 kids in the class, every minute is 30 minutes of wasted time.
Yeah. Well, that's because we are in an era of indulgence, an era of, if the child is misbehaving, it's because he has an unmet need. And therefore you are discriminating against his disability. That's what they say, as opposed to, no, he's just naughty. Because all kids are naughty. Some are a little bit naughty, some are really naughty. And the ones who are really naughty, you can make less naughty by punishing them. But if each time you make an excuse for him and say, oh, it's because he's got ADHD. Oh, it's because he's got anger management issues. Oh, it's because, he has a difficult home life. Whatever it is. There's 1,000,001 different excuses that you can come up with for a child. Well, if you keep doing that to him, then he will run the classroom instead of you, and nobody learns anything.
One of the things that was incredibly striking about the time I spent at your school that doesn't get captured by the descriptions of the mechanics, like the quietly moving through the hallway, giving lots of detentions, that's all quick to get. But what's less obvious is I sat in the teacher's lounge and talked to the teachers for several hours. And there was a wide range of teachers, some who were just there new, some who had been there for up to 8 years plus.
Yes.
And they said the hardest thing for them was publicly as in the classroom, shaming the children when they performed badly and not immediately softening the blow of the shame. So if a young kid, if one of their students, then they gave different examples that all sounded exactly the same, did bad on a test or whatever, didn't turn in their homework, they were like, oh my gosh, it was so hard to do this, to say, Joe, I'm so disappointed in you. You're better than this. Why didn't you do this? What's wrong with you? Detention. And then just sit there and let it sit with them. And they said, and the other thing they said was, the problem is, and every one of the teachers agreed with this to a fault, right down the line. There was no exceptions. They said, if you show signs of weakness, basically, in your critique, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
What's going on there? Help me and my viewers understand, why is shame useful and good in the classroom? And maybe shame is not the right word, but I like it as a Catholic, especially. And why do you have to hold the line there? Why do you have to not soften the blow of that criticism when criticism is warranted?
Okay, so shame, it's interesting when you say, well, you feel like you slightly have to defend it. And that's because in this culture nowadays, the idea of being ashamed of anything is really not the done thing. So if you think about it, if we're never ashamed of anything that we do, that means we're proud of everything we do. And if we do bad things, we're proud of that too. That is a recipe for disaster in any society. It means when we look around society and think, well, why is everybody behaving badly? Why are people doing things that are really quite worrying? Because there are things that people do nowadays, like, I don't know, the terrorist activity that we've seen, the great examples of coercion and I don't know, fraud that's happened and all kinds of nonsense. You look at that and you think, oh my goodness, how are these people doing that? Well, should they not be ashamed of it? This idea that, well, should we not shame them, or should we say, well done for defrauding the government? I mean, that's crazy. So shame is good. Otherwise, you have a shameless society where anything goes. And we do currently have a shameless society where anything goes. So shame is good. What I would say, just to slightly correct what you were saying, so they wouldn't say something like, oh, what's wrong with you? Because that's just a bit mean. So you wouldn't want to be mean to them. You would want to hold the line and hold them to account for the thing that they've done badly, which they could have and should have done better. So when you say doing badly on a test, I'm imagining that your viewers might think, but what if he's just struggling? So our teachers would only shame a child on a test where they know that child should have and could have done much better if he'd just done the work. Right? If he'd just done the revision, he would have done much better. It'll be some quick quiz that they do, which is just revising what they've done that day. There's absolutely no excuse for them not doing well on it if they'd gone home and done their homework. So doing badly at that means they didn't do their homework. Now, when a child chooses not to do their homework, chooses to misbehave, they're using their agency. So it's really important that we recognize that children have agency. They're not being made to do it because of some ghost out there, pulling their strings. They're not being made to do it because of this unmet need. Even children with needs can behave and can do their homework. They all have agency. And frankly, I think it's really insulting to children, this idea that they don't have agency. So as long as somebody has agency, then we need to respect them enough to hold them to account by what they do. And therefore, praise them when they do the right thing and make them feel ashamed when they do the wrong thing. Because if all you do is give them a detention and you don't make them feel shame, then they'll do the wrong thing over and over and over again. Why would they do it differently, right? You might say, well, they don't want to get the detention. Oh, I have met dozens, hundreds of kids in my lifetime happy to take the detention. They'll just keep taking the detention. The only way you move children is through them understanding shame. If they don't get ashamed about anything, they'll never change their behavior. So frankly, if there's no shame, you're not doing anything good for those children. And that, I'm afraid, is 2026. You are describing everything that's wrong with our schools and with our families.
Yeah, one of the things that, again, to come back to hearing carefully, trying to listen very carefully to what these teachers are saying, is they were very typical teachers, I think, that were coming from the other schools in your country.
Yeah.
That I think, and everything they were describing, from the sort of broadly left culture to the permissiveness, and in some cases just the chaos, because some of them were coming from schools where the behavior was not controlled in any meaningful way, and It was just chaos, and there was violence, and there were threats, and kids throwing chairs, and all the stuff that we see.
Yeah.
But they were deeply uncomfortable with doing this. They were coming out of a world where they had acculturated to feeling like they were doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, how do you be a teacher? How do you enter a school system where you're the teacher and you feel like it's wrong to discipline the class? Like, what happened there?
Well, tell me it's interesting because when you mentioned shame, said, "Oh yeah, well, I kind of feel like shame." Oh, you were a bit awkward about it. Why do you feel awkward around the idea of shame? I mean, why?
Well, I kind of mostly don't anymore. But I will say, what I was meaning, it perhaps. Well, let's see. Good question. I think that in the desire to not be self-righteous and judgmental in adult society, I've never felt this about kids. I've always had a sense. I've always acted with my own children as the authority. But in society more broadly, I want to be a little on guard for shaming people. Now, I'm not that great at that. I tend to get a little self-righteous, especially on Twitter, when it's kind of the worst. But that's where that is the discomfort. It is a kind of like Christian ethics to be like, don't point out the log in your neighbor's eye until the splinter in your neighbor's eye unless you remove the log out of your own. So I think that's one of the things that is in tension there, perhaps. I don't know. Being a scold just doesn't feel great.
Yes, but we're talking about children. So I can sort of understand that when it comes to other adults, although even then, I think spreading the news about how to be a good person is always a good thing. You're not condemning anyone. You're just playing your role as an adult. So if you were to send the child out of the classroom and never speak to him again, then that's a different matter. But it's your role as an adult to send him out, to put your child on the naughty step. If you never put your child on the naughty step, your child is going to be an absolute nightmare. I mean, unless every now and again, you get some parents that get really lucky and they happen to have a child who has a really lovely demeanor, fine. I'm not talking about those. For the vast majority of children, if you don't ever tell them off, if you don't put them on the naughty step, you are in for one hell of a ride when they're 12, 13, 14, 15. So you're laying the groundwork for later. It's your job, parents. It's your job, teachers, to help mold children into being better versions of themselves. That's our job. If we don't do it, we're not doing our jobs. It's simple. We are letting children down when we don't do that. And where else are they meant to get it? If they're not getting it from us as adults, then what the hell? I mean, that's what we're meant to do for them. It's like we're just sleeping on the job. And we're sleeping on the job, by the way, because we care more about how it makes us feel. Oh, but I feel bad because then I'm a bit judgmental. Oh, I feel bad because that makes me seem like I'm a bad person. As opposed to, look, that's your job, honey. Get up and do it. Look, you decided to become a teacher. You decided to become a mom or a dad. Now do your job. You don't buy a puppy and then say, oh no, I'm not going to train it. You invested this. You decided to do this. Now do your job.
That's the best. True. One of the things that is in your ARC speech and that is connected to the question of shame in our culture is this race narrative. You came at this very directly in the speech in a way that I think was even more pointed than maybe in the past. That, you're talking about this Henry Nowak heinous disaster where this young man is stabbed by a guy that happens to be brown, and the cops come in, and it's pretty clear that they favor the murderer and reject the stab victim to his ultimate demise because the stab victim's white, the murderer is brown, and they don't want to be called a racist. That you lay that out in your speech. As we sit here, what is the way forward in talking about race as adults in the public square, as teachers? How should we help our kids understand the world and what's gone wrong?
Yeah, well, that's exactly the same idea. So tend as human beings to care more about how we appear to others than what is actually real, what's true. So if we look like we're racist, if we look like we're the bad guy, in the classroom because we're giving out detentions, or we look like the mother who's being mean to her children because she's putting them on the naughty step, we shy away from holding the line because of the way it makes us look. So those poor police officers, when faced with this scenario, I mean, to defend them slightly, the brown man had accused Henry of racism and had said that this young man had been racist to him. And the police officers, just their brains immediately went to, well, he's the victim then. And this young white man is not the victim because he's the racist. Now, the thing is, because they're so immersed in that kind of culture, they immediately link, well, I don't want to be a racist. And look, he must be the racist because I've been told he's the racist. And being a racist is really bad. And I don't want to be anything like that. So they're then paralyzed and they're unable to help him. And that's how bad things have got because of what Shelby Steele, one of your African Americans, who first introduced me to the idea of white guilt. He's in his 80s now, but, he used to write, he's written a book, I think, called White Guilt and other books as well. Great guy, conservative. And he explains very eloquently how, unfortunately, white liberals are so guilty about their privilege that they are unable to allow Black people or brown people, ethnic minorities, they're unable to allow Black people the dignity of being able to have agency in their own lives, to be able to make something of themselves. Instead, they'd rather give them welfare. They'd rather be the white knight in shining armor sweeping in and helping them, as opposed to saying, you know what we need to do? We need to have some good schools, give them some good math and English and so on, teach them well, and then let them go to it and make something of their lives, And frankly, any people that's ever done well in life, that's what they do, right? They... they're seamstresses into the middle of the night, working, or they're opening up corner shops and working again till the middle of the night to enable their community group to rise. That's what any successful community has done through the ages in any country. If white liberals want to stop people from doing that, then they're not able to. They're actually preventing those minorities from making something of their lives.
Well, the story they tell is that Europe, particularly the British Empire, followed by the greatest evil of all, the American Empire, is to blame for all these problems. That the reason why anyone who's Black or brown and on planet Earth today isn't living the best possible conceivable life is because the white man has colonized and spread catastrophe and exploited them, this or that place. And so now that's the problem. That's why, we have teen takeovers in America where teenage Black kids just go around basically destroying places. And it's that, but that's not their fault because they're acting degenerate. It's somehow my fault because I have European heritage or something. That's the story. I'm not, I think I'm being pretty fair. I think that's basically the story. But how do you combat that story with kids who are hearing that from like every other corner of the universe?
Yeah, well, you got to give them a different story and you got to give them something else to believe in. Look, I mean, there's a little bit of truth in what they say. I mean, to some extent, it is very hard. Black kid growing up in the inner city. Imagine. So Black kid's growing up in the inner city. He's just got a mum at home. He's never known his dad. He goes to some terrible school where there are just fights all the time, people, carrying weapons on the outside. There's no ambition. There's no way of being able to teach himself the math and the English and the geography because, where is he? How is he meant to teach himself? I mean, he's a kid. And when they're little, they're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, where are they learning how to speak? Where are they learning how to read? So then he gets to 12, 13. He struggles to read a book for a 6-year-old. He's not really able to do math. How's he meant to fix this? So to some extent, the narrative is such that, this kid really just can't make it. I get it. When the left say that, I agree with them. But what are we going to do about it? Right? What we need to do about it is give him a good education. It's the only way, right? It's the only way. And yet, this is the thing that I cannot understand. When somebody like me is providing an excellent education and an excellent model for everyone to copy, there are a whole bunch of progressives out there that are absolutely determined to shut us down. Now, that's what makes no sense at all. I get them saying this kid is going to have a hard time making something of his life. But if everybody did what I'm doing, he wouldn't have such a hard time. So then you got to ask yourself, why do they not want to have schools like this? Why do they not want that kid to have these opportunities? And that's where it then gets interesting, because they claim to love these kids. They claim to want these kids to do well. And yet, when those kids are doing well, they do everything in their power to stop the people who are helping those kids doing well. So there's something else going on. Like that, there's something else going on.
Well, I want to linger on that. So one example at the education level in the United States is Mississippi, which is about as close to being the archetype of the Deep South as we get. Now exceeds California, one of the wealthiest countries. It is almost like a country. It's practically another country now. But one of the wealthiest states in the nation, one of the bluest in terms of governance, one of the most overrun by progressive ideology in school. Their schools suck. Their poor kids are living in hell. Mississippi is thriving and kicking butt. And among the reasons, as I understand it, for the so-called Mississippi miracle is they've basically abandoned all the progressive nonsense about how to teach reading and writing, and they went back to phonics.
That's right.
And the old school, where you learned how to, like the way everyone learned until 5 minutes ago, and before like white lab coat whack jobs from Johns Hopkins and Columbia decided let's re-architect math and reading.
Yeah, that's right.
And the results are in.
Yeah,
but the blue team in California, the only way those schools will change is if like we somehow like inject them with an antidote to their own ideology. So let's talk about the ideology there, because you're pointing at the thing that's like we're not supposed to in civil society say, Milton Friedman would say, assume good intentions, argue from a place of assuming good intentions. But there does come a point where if you are in a position where it is supposed to be your job to do a thing, like teach your kids how to read or run a school system like California, where you have clear examples of the better way to do it, you choose not to because of some other value. And I think at that point I get to say, maybe you're just evil.
Yes, although what I would say is that for a lot of these people, one, it's actually quite hard to, like, just practically to make these things happen. It is just hard. But it's also impossible if you're just a teacher in the classroom. You can have some impact, but it's impossible to have the kind of impact that Mississippi's having unless you're at the top making decisions. Right. So it really matters who's at the top. So it's a mixture of some people who are pretty evil, right? But the majority of them are not evil. The majority of them are just trying to survive the day. And they like teaching, and they like kids, and they believe the rhetoric that poor kids misbehave because they're poor. And that what you say the Mississippi example is there for them, but it's another state. They don't know what Mississippi's doing. They have no idea. All they know is that every day they go to their classroom and get told to F off. And they're just trying to survive on a really low salary. So like it's just not as straightforward. It's just really complicated why all of these things happen. Now, how do we get the word out there so that more people know what works? Well, that's why I'm doing Strictly Education, why you're doing Strictly Education. Why do we believe in this? Because the more we can spread the word, the more teachers in their classrooms, the more parents at home will say, wait a minute, there's another way. And look, I hear from people all the time, all over the world, who will write to me and they'll say, I used to think I was crazy. I used to think there was something wrong with me. And then I heard you speak. And oh my goodness, everything that you said, it's so true. You made me realize it's not me, And I know that people are desperate for this out there. So we need to spread the word, tell everybody about Strictly Education. And I'm hoping that over years, people will change their minds.
the people I was referring to as being maybe they're evil is not the average teacher struggling in the classroom. It's the person who is convinced that on an ideological basis that those kids are victims, and that they've bought hook, line, and sinker the victimhood ideology, which says they are victims somewhat almost metaphysically.
Yep.
And therefore, their own actions have no consequence for their lives.
Yeah.
Because the second you recognize the consequence that their actions have, then responsibility comes right in through the front door. So I can't do that. And you sort of alluded to it. It was like, well, if you're going to look at this behavior and you're going to say, well, I'm going to embrace the ideology that makes that possible, and I'm also going to do some other things that have happened, which is say, attack all the pillars that made this successful in the past, because teen takeovers wasn't a thing in 1950 in Black neighborhoods. It's a thing in 2026 for reasons that seem to me to be largely progressive politics oriented in nature.
Yes.
The attack on the family, the reward structures of the welfare state, and all of this victimhood ideology. So let's go right at the ideological forces that possess people to hate you in your school when you're doing the thing that they say they want, but they are attacking you when the results are plain as day. Your kids are incredible. Your kids behave more than civilized. Your kids are like, it's immediate. Like anybody that's ever been an employer that visits your school is like, well, I know where I'm going to go to first to hire somebody straight out of high school. Michaela.
Yeah, that's true. But the good news is, look, when we first started in 2014, the whole school was hated in every possible way. So everything we did was wrong. All of our, techniques and things that we were doing to help the kids behave, etc., was wrong. Everything was wrong. And I was hated by everybody. I am hated by far fewer people nowadays. So I kept going. It's got to the point now where many of our practical ideas are copied by other schools. Across Britain, you will find all sorts of ideas from this school that are happening in schools elsewhere. Great. Now, the last sort of obstacle are the values of the school. So people are willing to come on board, like 10 years ago, they weren't willing, but nowadays they're willing to come on board with the idea of thinking about corridor behavior, thinking about lineups, thinking about putting your desks in rows, thinking about getting the kids, we call it a visualizer, you Americans call it a dot cam that you use to write on, and then it's projected up onto the board behind you, counting out the books, getting the kids to fold their arms in front of them and sit up straight. All of this sort of stuff. The schools are doing this all over the place now. So, and they wouldn't have done it 10 years ago, right? So things have moved. The last obstacle is the obstacle on values. And that very much, small c conservative values is what I call them: personal responsibility, understanding that you have agency, having a duty towards other people other than yourself, where you might sacrifice something that's important for yourself for the betterment of the whole, gratitude, kindness, rejection of victimhood and grievance, and all of these small c conservative values that all our grandmothers and grandfathers knew. That is very much at the heart of Strictly. And that's the last obstacle that I feel serious pushback when it comes to the education establishment. But I mean, look, time has taught me, you just keep going. You keep arguing the same things over and over again. And eventually one little classroom changes here. Parents over here change. That school takes on some ideas and people gradually move. And then eventually they're doing it. And then they say, well, we've always done it this way. So, and that's fine by me, fine. They can say they've always done it that way.
There's a great saying, there's nothing you can't achieve so long as you don't care who gets the credit.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's right.
Let them believe they've always been doing this and not been playing a role that's largely villainous up to 5 minutes ago. That would be great. I would gladly exercise forgiveness if you've suddenly decided I'm not going to keep poisoning the civilization. To the question of history, I think this is one of the areas from a culture perspective that is maybe the most acute problem in the way our kids get taught and in the culture that comes about. I'm sitting here we are into the 250th birthday of the Declaration of Independence in the United States, and so this is a time, I think, for Americans to look back on the founding principles. And there are people who believe that no, our founding principles are either so laced in hypocrisy to almost invalidate the people who founded the country, or that they're rotten from the start. And so there's this sort of understanding who we are and where we came from, particularly as Americans and as the British, that I think you and I want to try to reorient. So how do you think about that? How do you approach history? I saw a presentation that your teachers did, one of your teachers whose classroom I sat in, who was incredible, talking about history, talking about the British Empire's role in India, for example, and the sort of more complicated relationship that the viceroy, I think the name was, of India had with actually the first prime minister of India. And
Yes.
he used it as an example of why the way our kids are currently getting taught is just to be kind, inadequate. I would call it just outright lying at this point. But help me understand, help the viewer understand the role that better teaching of history can play in all of this.
Yeah, so I talked about this in my ARC speech. If you're brought up to believe that the number one evil in the world is racism, and the number one thing you don't want to be is a racist, and if this has partly been formed by the things that you've been taught at school, Hitler, for instance, you'll do Inside Out, and you know very well that he was a racist, and therefore you don't want to be like Hitler. You'll do women trying to get, the vote. So they were being oppressed by white men who were stopping them from getting the vote, and they were just misogynists. There's just a real sense of you don't want to be someone who is oppressing other people. If that's your understanding of history, and you don't really have any sense of the historical ways in which your institutions have developed, the faith in your country, the laws of your country. If you don't have any sense of that, you don't really know what your country is. All you know is that your country is really racist. And then you don't like your country because, you don't want to be a racist. And so if teachers spend a lot of their time teaching these topics and only these topics, it gives children a false understanding of the history of their country. It gives them a false sense, not just of the history of the country, but what their country is. And it makes it very hard for them to feel like they want to belong to their country. That's whether or not they're brown, black, or white. It doesn't matter. And unfortunately, that is how more and more history is being taught. First of all, there's very little time to teach history. So you've got maybe 45 minutes a week if you're lucky. Sometimes it's 45 minutes every 2 weeks. Given the terrible behavior that goes on in most of our schools, you're probably getting about half an hour of teaching that goes on in that time. Then there's the quality of teaching and how people teach. And if you're getting them to guess what's in your head instead of actually giving them knowledge, then you're really learning very, very little. And if you don't believe me, because people say, this can't possibly be true. Well, go and talk to some kids. I challenge any of you. Go and find, and I don't know about the red states. I can't say. If they're next to some lovely little Christian school that's teaching them properly, I don't mean that school. But go to New York, right? Go and find some kids on the street. Ask them about their knowledge of history. Same thing in London. Find any group of kids. Ask them about what they know about the country. They won't. I tried it the other day. I was in South London with a bunch of kids and I asked them. They told me exactly what I've told you. They said, so what did they know? They knew about women fighting for the vote. They said, women fought for the vote. I said, right, is there anything else that you can think of? They knew Henry VIII had wives he'd killed, right? So they said, he chopped off their heads. That's what he said. That they said, Henry VIII, he's a big bad white guy who kills his wives, right? and they knew about Hitler. And I said, what do you know about Hitler? Well, he hated the Jews. That's all they know. I said, is there anything else you could think of? There was nothing else they could think of. So that's standard, right?
Yeah, I just saw a post by the Cato Institute who found that, I forget the age group, but it was there were 6 or 7 of the most basic civics questions possible, like how many branches of government are there? And there was only one of them out of the 7 that a majority of the young people they surveyed got right. Like like everybody got even the most basic stuff, not even about our history, just about the current structure of the government of the country.
Okay.
Wrong.
So and now I can guarantee you that there are lots of progressives who'll be listening to you thinking, well, does it really matter? Why do you need to know how the government is constructed?
Well, they're the same ones who say democracy is the most important thing in the whole world.
Yes,
so
but then they'll say all that matters is you're able to vote for who you want in power. What does it matter if you know how the government is constructed? And I would argue the reason why it matters that you know how the government works is that you have some knowledge of your country. That helps you feel like this is yours and you belong to it and you like it, right? You want to be part of it, right? Because you know it. If you don't know it, it's like finding a boyfriend or a girlfriend, but you don't know them at all, right? You don't know anything about them, but they're your boyfriend. Well, in what way is he your boyfriend? I mean, you don't know him, so you don't have a relationship. It's the same with the country. If you don't know anything about your country, apart from actually that your country is pretty terrible because of all the terrible things that it's done in the past, then what kind of a relationship is that? I mean, it's just a relationship. It's an abusive relationship. I mean, it's awful. And we don't understand. Like we don't understand what we've done to our children.
The thing that's just so striking is I'm 48, and it's only in the past couple of years that I have come to realize the extent to which America and Britain's role in slavery. If you think about slavery throughout human history and throughout the world, including during the time of the founding of the country and during the century that follows, we're basically the heroes of slavery. We're basically the ones that brought it to its end in most of the planet, especially Britain, but also like the U.S. states right from the start. Most of the colonies were free states. There was only, I think, 5 that were slave states. The only reason why that was tolerated was because survival as an independent rebellion was essential to have unity. And I think that's pretty indisputable. And so it's like radicalizing to have come up and hear, yes, America's great, but slavery. And then to find out, well, actually, everyone had slavery, and the only thing that makes America hypocritical is everybody else was fine with it, except for us and the Brits. It's radicalizing. It makes you crazy. It makes you unable to speak to others who haven't had that revelation in the same way and not sound like you're somehow suddenly like an apologist for slavery.
Yes. I mean, yeah, everything you say is true. I mean, it's also the case that obviously slavery, there were some pretty awful things that took place. We understand that, right?
But all of history is horrible.
Yes. I mean, and that is all true. The problem is when you're only telling them one bit of it with a particular viewpoint, and that's what's happening. And it won't just be slavery; it'll be everything. They'll know. So in America, what will they know? They'll know that Black people fought for civil rights. They'll know that Jim Crow laws. They'll know about slavery. They'll know. I mean, I go and ask them. I love it. I'd love it. We need to do it. You and I, John, need to go outside some schools and ask them, because I am certain, because I know what teachers are like. I know what the textbooks are like. And the reason why I say I know what teachers are like is because they think they're doing right by children when they do that. They think that they're teaching children to question the establishment and to question what they're being told. This is one of the things that, I think often the right get wrong. So the right think to themselves that what we need to, they're always saying, I had this big discussion with Jordan Peterson. If your viewers could find me, Jordan Peterson, I was on his podcast, and he was saying, he was disagreeing. I was disagreeing with him. And I said to him, look, we do very much, he said, we don't need to teach them what to think, we need to teach them how to think. This is a standard thing that people on the right come up with.
You hit Elon for similar things, including in our last conversation.
Yes. Elon, Jordan, everybody, all of these right-wingers, they're all wrong, right? And they're wrong because it is impossible to teach someone how to think. Critical thinking is not taught. What's taught is knowledge. And then when you have that knowledge, you will think critically about it. The problem that we've got in our schools is that we're teaching them a very particular type of knowledge that helps to indoctrinate them in thinking in a particular kind of way. It's not that they're not being critical in their thinking. They are. It's just that they've only got certain bits of knowledge to think critically about. What we need to do is give them more knowledge. If we gave them more knowledge, then they could use those critical faculties to think about all of that knowledge. Instead, they're only thinking about that. That's the problem. It's not that we're not teaching them how to think. It's that we're teaching them only certain bits of knowledge which help to brainwash them in a particular kind of way. Now, some people, progressives would listen to me saying that, saying, what do you mean? Brainwashing children. That's really incendiary. How can you say that sort of thing? I don't think teachers go in there thinking they're trying to brainwash anybody. They don't want to. They think that they're teaching children to question the establishment, which is precisely what the right want them to do, right?
Like, especially, it is the funny challenge of our times. Well, it's the challenge period, but I don't think I know anyone who can't find fault in the current society, because we are a society of humans in a fallen world, and there's all kinds of disasters at all times. So you end up with the question of, what do you want to change and why? But everybody wants to change something. The most ardent conservative, the strictest traditionalist, well, they want to change us back to something that looked more traditional than right now. They're like, no, I want to be. So that still involves change. That still involves turning over the existing order.
Yes. But the only way in which you can turn over, so what am I doing? I'm very radical in the way that we teach and the way I run the school and this whole Strictly Education podcast, all of that is very radical. And I have a goal to change things. But the only way that I can do that in a way that brings about good is by doing that from a position of very strong knowledge about what I'm talking about. If, on the other hand, you're just spreading prejudice and you have ill-informed views, then actually you're doing great damage in the world. And unfortunately, I think some teachers are like that. They are spreading wrong information, or they're not giving the right, enough of the knowledge. And that's because they don't understand that their role is to do that. They think their role is to create activists as opposed to teaching children their subject really well.
How, we talked about this in our last conversation, but I'd like to go a little deeper on this question of critical thinking, partly because I have made it like a second career to be using these AI tools to build all kinds of software. I basically wake up in the morning and work on my Claude Code and ChatGPT, building all kinds of things.
Right.
And so I've got a pretty good understanding of the way this technology works. And it kind of profoundly agrees with you as a technology. And here's what I mean. What AI is, current AI, these tools like Anthropic's Claude and ChatGPT, et cetera, Grok, is this like simplified simulation of a human mind using these things called neural networks. And the way it does what it does is by simply filling it, they call it training, with information, with knowledge. And as they've added more knowledge, more data to these things, they have suddenly developed the ability to write software pretty effectively, actually quite effectively, and do all kinds of other things. And it's not understood even why that happens.
Exactly.
They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do it.
That's exactly it. That's so funny that you're saying this about AI. That's exactly what happens in the classroom. People say, yes, but how are you going to get them to become team players? How are you going to teach collaboration skills? How are you going to teach, thinking skills? How are you going to think critical thinking? Like, all you need to do is give them the knowledge. and then get them to do something with the knowledge. That's all you got to do. And all of that other stuff happens.
I mean, one of the things that, so another sort of very specific example, and it is of the same kind, is we have a Tesla. We just got it. We got it, maybe 6 months ago for my wife as her car. We got like a base Model Y, and I kind of came into it a little skeptical. I think the electric car thing is kind of overblown. However, the self-driving thing on this is like miraculous. And if you haven't used it, then you don't understand how crazy it is. But it drives like a person, actually better. In fact, there is at least one insurance company that will now give you a 50% insurance reduction if you make it your primary way of using the car. And as I understand it, the way that they overcame the hurdle to going from being kind of good, but occasionally catastrophe, to being like broadly better than human drivers, is they stopped trying to teach it how to drive. Instead, they sort of said all of the like little rules, like if this, then that, if here, then there. They stripped all that, what would be called like deterministic software, out, and just let it absorb all the driving data. And
that
be
is
more
so fascinating.
That's exactly what's happened.
That is so fascinating. Well, that's the same. Look, I've been doing this a long time. I do it pretty well. That is what you do with kids. Give them loads of knowledge. I tell you what's a superpower. I say to all families, reading is a superpower. You get your kid reading and just get him reading over and over and over again. Well, he's set for life. That's all he needs, because there's loads of knowledge in books, and then he can just read his way to having tons of critical thinking. That is how you make your kid, right? People don't understand that. All you need to do is get them reading. Look, with your young kid, reading and math. Count the peas on the plate, count the cars in the street, count the houses, then count by twos, then count by threes, then count by fours. Then eventually do your times tables. Drill them over and over and over again so it's just super fast, right? Just like with the alphabet, same thing with the phonics, and then the words, and then the paragraphs. And then eventually, those two things, that's all they need when they're little. And then the rest will just come. It just will. But I mean, I don't know. Like I've been saying this for 3 decades. I mean, we like to make things very complicated, and people, and this is where I'm trying to explain. People on the left and on the right, in the end up agreeing to do all the wrong things. Like that, they don't get it.
I want to talk about an aspect of this. This is the natural part of our conversation to bring this up, because we're talking about technology and about the left and right converging. And that would be on our kids' relationship with technology more broadly, and in the classroom and in the society. So in London, we got into a bit of a disagreement, which I'd like to dig into even more, about whether or not a state or a country or a government should ban access to social media for its youth. You and I are in agreement that it should probably be stricken from the classroom. So maybe we can start there. Why? Explain your vision and your sense of the role or the absence of screens and technology devices in classrooms, and then we can talk about the broader one and like go at it together.
Yeah. So look, you give your kid as a parent an iPhone, an iPad, and so on. Well, you're going to kill their love of reading. You're going to kill their love of doing anything apart from being on that screen. And they're going to want to be on there 24 hours a day, and they will be addicted. 2-year-olds, swiping on a magazine because they think that's how it works. Like it is really just, it's a travesty what's going on, because young families have no idea. They think it's normal, and they are preventing their children from ever really, the superpower I spoke about, reading, their child never really develops properly because they're just online all the time. It's the same thing with the classroom. Obviously, if kids are online all the time outside of school, we don't want to put them online when they're in school as well. At school, it's the one place which you should keep, it should be sacrosanct, and that you would not have technology in the classroom, because otherwise kids are just not really learning very much. They just aren't. And people can say, but you can personalize learning and so on. I'm telling you, it will turn them into robots, and dead robots, dead behind the eyes. That's what technology does to them. Now,
why? Why do you think that is the case? Because there is a lot of people, including like conservatives, who are super excited about the AI teacher that will replace all these teachers' union drones with something that will respond to them and do the thing that teachers do. Why is that?
Okay. So what you just said, something that's going to respond to them and do the things that teachers do. So the number one thing that a teacher does is build a relationship with the child. That's what the teacher is doing. And you build a relationship of love with the child. You love the child loves you back, and they work for you because they love you and they want your respect and admiration. And the only way you're going to give them your respect and admiration is by holding the line, keeping your standards high, and every time they fall short of those standards, you say, no, detention, no, out of the class. And then they work harder to get back up, and then they, gold star this time, well done, and so on. It's praise and punishment. AI can't do that. And if AI is doing that, then actually you need to be pretty damn worried. Because it's character AI, for instance, there are children who have committed suicide out there. I'm being serious. It's awful. There are children who have committed suicide because they fall in love with a particular character, which is an AI bot. And then the AI bot persuades them to commit suicide. So you don't want an AI bot doing the same thing as a teacher does, because a teacher is somebody who you would hope you can trust. Now, I agree that there are all sorts of issues when it comes to trusting teachers. But if you can trust your teachers, then a real teacher, you don't want an AI bot building relationships with your kids in that kind of way. And frankly, I don't think an AI bot, generally speaking, can do that. They can't motivate your child. Your child isn't going to care about the AI bot. So all that AI bot can do is give some knowledge. And you know what? If you're sat down with the iPad with your child, watching that AI bot and learning from it, I have no problem with that. That's fine. Because you as the parent are the one that's going to keep your child motivated and interested. Oh, look at this. You notice how the robot just said that? What do you think about that? Let's have a conversation. And then the child loves what you're doing together because you're bonding together over that iPad. That is a great way of doing things as far as I'm concerned. But that isn't what's going to happen. What happens is that you park your child in front of that laptop or iPad and you leave them to it. And then goodness knows what they're getting up to. And one thing they're not getting up to is learning anything. That I can guarantee. So you definitely don't want it in the classroom. You don't want it at home. I would be keeping them off those kinds of devices until the age of 16. Now, where you and I have disagreed is that I've been very pro keeping them off social media. And you're happy for parents to keep them off social media. You just don't think the government should interfere. Now,
well, just to set the table, and this is an area where I think I get into. This is harder than it seems, I think, for folks to grapple with, because I have people who I broadly agree with, even in this office, who have different inclinations. Women tend to be even more, on average, I think, supportive of governments, the states and the federal government in the U.S. putting in limits, saying no one below the age of 16 is allowed to access social media, for example. So what's happened in the UK? I know, like, Keir Starmer made essentially that announcement that there was going to be a ban on social media for Brits below, I think, 16. Is that? Do you have any more info on how that's taken shape?
Well, no, I mean, nothing's happened with that now, but like that's what's meant to happen. I mean, to be honest, my position has always been that I want smartphones banned. I've sort of accepted social media as a ban, but that's a sort of compromise. So I'm part of various national groups where we've been trying to campaign, and I've been doing this for 10 years. I mean, I banned phones here at this school long before anybody else did, you know, and that's because I can see the damage it does to children. Why do I dislike smartphones so much? Because it gives them unsupervised access to the internet. If you have a laptop at home, the parent can watch what the child is doing. The problem with the smartphone is that it is necessarily outside of the house. So you have no idea what your child is accessing. Now, what I would say for your conservative audience, which is something that they should consider when they're thinking about this, because I understand your concern, John, and some of your viewers will have the same concern, which is that, yeah, these left-wing governments, they're happy to ban social media for under 16s, but this isn't really because they care about the kids. This is because they're just trying to track what the adults are doing. I
Right.
have
Well,
to
let me
say,
just so that we can have the viewer, because I think there's a couple things real quick, and then I don't mean to
yes,
interrupt. But number one,
yes,
actually, so Texas already passed a law that requires, and it's now in force, age verification in the state to access app stores and various tools.
right.
This is broadly popular among conservatives. In fact, I don't have a stat off the top of my head, but I would not be remotely surprised if most conservatives like this. And so
Okay.
I'm actually kind of an outlier here in that, just to
Okay.
state my position so that we can hash it out for everyone's benefit, hopefully, is that the problem I encounter is first of all, it's like Lord Acton's problem. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And specifically when it comes to technologies involving communications, you can't disentangle the fact that in order to do any of this, in order to ban access to pornography even, or age limit it by law beyond just saying that the company has to try to put up age gates. But let's just stick to either banning smartphones, as you're saying you want to do, or access to any particular website. The way that has to get executed immediately is every single adult that accesses the internet needs to submit proof that they're an adult. And therefore, you have essentially stripped the adults on the internet of anonymity. And it is the very same government that did all the things that we've heard about in the Twitter files and all the heinous stuff currently happening across Europe. Your country's putting 12,000 people a year in prison for Facebook posts. You make the Russians look like the most liberal democracy the world has ever seen on this count. So that's the problem I have. It's a very uncomfortable position because I actually agree with all the problems of social media and smartphones for kids. And I also agree that it's really hard to do as a parent because of the network effects, and you send your kids out into the world, and even if they can't have it at home,
But
they
John,
have it out there.
it's not just really hard. It's actually impossible. I think in a red state where you're sending your kid to the local Christian school that also bans phones, it might be possible. But generally speaking, it's just impossible for parents unless you are some total weirdo. And if you're a total weirdo, you can do it. But most parents are not total weirdos. Obviously, they're just normal. And so it's literally impossible for them to stop it because there's no centralized authority. So it's like drinking or having sex or driving or getting married or watching for that matter. I do think it's really problematic if we've got a society where 13-year-olds are all watching because you got to know that if your child has access to the online world, he's watching. He will be. There's just no question about it. So, therefore, we're making it, when we look at the Western situation where white people are no longer reproducing, for instance, or where we look at, why are all these young people voting for Mandami and Zach Polanski, our equivalent here which is the Green Party here, and our Green Party really makes the Labour Party. You talk about 12,000 people, and you have no idea what the Green Party would be doing.
It's the watermelon party. It's green on the outside, deep red on the inside. Red is communist.
Yeah, it really is. So the fact is that why are our young people so communist in their thinking, or so identitarian in their thinking? Why are they like that? It's because of what they're accessing online. And so I actually think that the right ought to care more about this than they do, because I think right-wing parties, conservative parties, are going to find it very difficult to get voted in the future because our young people, and this is where I say children matter, if our young people are being schooled both at school and in the online world, well, there's no hope that they'll ever vote for a conservative party later, because what's on TikTok out there, there is no conservative movement out there online that they are going to access. And so...
Well, I guess here's my challenge back to you on this, to debate for a little bit. We had a kind of natural experiment here. Now, given this is with voters, so it's not with children, but Donald Trump was uniformly, by all of the institutions that have any kind of a power, deplatformed in 2020, and was fundamentally stripped of anything that could look like sort of rights in the digital age. He was Twitter removed him in the aftermath of January 6th. And then every other, he was sued up and down with varying degrees of illegitimacy. And some criticism, some of those suits had some, it wasn't like every single argument made against Donald Trump was false. I don't want to overstate the case. But along comes podcasts and new media. And despite all of the powers that be, these are the powers that would control access to the internet in the world that you're describing, in the world in which we allow the state to have this kind of control over speech technologies. It will be controlled by the NPR types. He still actually won. He actually won with younger voters in particular and young men. And there very much is a vibrant, thriving, conservative online ecosystem, in part because the formal power structure institutions have all become so radically left. They're downright diabolical. They don't even they don't know what men and women are still in 2026.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
why are you confident that that's not what will happen to the entire internet if the only bulwark against this, which is conservatives, acquiesce and let the state control access?
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying. I do think we come back to the same point that you guys have states. So there, the fact that you all are divided by the states, it's just different. So your experience in Texas and the way in which, Trump is winning, won because he's got a whole bunch. You're right. There's a whole load of young voters in those red states. They don't exist here, or in France, or in Germany, or in anywhere in Europe. The fact is that all of these much smaller countries that don't have states in the way that you do in America, it's a completely different way of doing things. And so we just aren't, we can't survive in the way that you all have run together. You've run out of those blue states and then congregated in these red states and are building a sort of fort house, where you're protecting yourselves. And I get it.
I get it. Fort Worth, if you will, which is a city in Texas.
Right.
It's one of the few ones with like a Republican mayor, I think, still. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas, like when you say about the tweets, people, you're absolutely right that our government, it's crazy what's going on. I mean, it is crazy.
Well, why won't, for example, I'm not sure I understand the point you're making, though, because the point I'm making is that the government that will age restrict the internet and gatekeep every adult's access to it is the same people who want to destroy Elon Musk, and Elon's X would not, that just simply wouldn't have happened. These are the same people, ultimately. So it's actually not about the geography. It's actually literally about the sort of vote with your feet of the world of the internet that I'm worried about, more than about the physical governments.
Yeah, look, I'm not saying that any particular politician is a good guy. I get it, and I get your suspicions of these people. But in the same way as I would trust the government to be able to bring out the police to deal with criminality when needed, just because, well, there's nobody else to do it. I'm not saying that they're brilliant people, but when there's a riot going on, I don't look to families and say, okay, families, you go and sort it out now. I expect the government to send in the police force because things are so bad that we need the government intervening. I'd say it's the same with the situation online for children. Things are so bad. And I think people just don't realize how bad they are. But all you need to do is look at the fact that Mandami's been voted in New York. I mean, it's and it's going to get worse. Things are going to get worse. You look at this, the reaction that some people are having to this Berlin situation. One, there's the situation which is terrible. Fine, but the thing that's most worrying is everybody's reaction in Germany. In Germany, they're saying, well, actually, it was the car. Well, actually, it was, it's just so bizarre. It's so bizarre. And I say it's so bizarre. It's not bizarre. No. They're like that because of what they were taught at school and online. Right? So I do think in a way we're comparing apples and oranges, because in America, I can actually it's interesting having this conversation because your point of view is going to be skewed by what you see with red and blue states. Mine is skewed by what I see here in a country which is immersed in progressivism, and we can't see it. It's like fish in water. We can't see it.
We can move on from debating this, but the thing I want to just impart to you, since we don't get to talk to each other as much as I'd like, is, or at least as a concern, is this. One of the things that's different about the United States and Europe, both historically, legally, but also right now in particular, is we have the First Amendment, and it applies to all 50 states. And one of the things, the First Amendment, which is that the government shall pass no law essentially infringing on the freedom of speech, expression, freedom of the practice of religion and establishment. Shall be no establishment of religion. It started off with a question of religion, which is fundamentally a question of freedom of conscience. And so that was the sort of root motivation, as I understand it, fundamentally in the history of this country, because we are like sort of birthed out of the Pilgrims and all these kind of wacky Christian sects that came here to escape the formal throne and the formal state religion of you guys. But what that has done is it has prevented a kind of government regime which it's certainly the EU, which the UK doesn't have, but technically I think you have similar things. The EU has something called the Digital Services and the Digital Markets Act, which are all the tools to do the stuff you're talking about. And what they are doing is censorship of the very criticism of the overarching social problems you're describing. That's what they're doing. So in Germany, as I understand it, it's like, oh, what, you don't like migrants whose fundamental political philosophy is antithetical to our society? Oh, you're going to vote for the party that says that out loud? We're just going to ban that party. And we're gonna come after you if you say anything that sounds like them. And so that's the thing. I think we can't do that here by law. But we have one side of our politics that wants to. And the thing that worries me, and again, like, I will have people in our audience who don't agree with me on this and agree with me on everything else, who are like, yes, but the internet is still a garbage heap and it's filled with porn and scammers and communists and we have to protect our kids from it. And I guess my last plea would just be careful what you wish for, because the tools that you're creating to ask the government to protect you from these things will be used against you, already are being used against you in your societies. And that I'll end it there, but I'd love to hear your response to that, because I don't think you're taking it seriously enough.
No, I hear what you're saying. I'm just saying I don't think you're taking it seriously enough when the entire population of 13-year-olds is watching. I don't think you're imagining what is actually going to happen when they're all being completely brainwashed by the crazy political situation on TikTok. Combine that with what they're being taught at schools. That's the future that I foresee is one where Mandami looks like a small fish in a massive pond of real. I mean, I know you don't like your communists, John. Well, communism is going to be everywhere if we go down that road. That's where but I hear what you're saying. And I 100% agree with you that, much of what our politicians have been doing recently in this country has been very, very worrying. I'm just not sure banning kids off social media will make any difference. Like, it's bad. It will remain bad. What we need to do as people in this country is vote differently. That's what we need to do. Because at the end of the day, we can blame our politicians as much as we like. We voted them in,
H.L. Mencken says that democracy is the theory that the people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard.
That's it. Sometimes, people need to feel pain before they realize they've made a mistake.
I think you and I both, I know, I completely agree with you that the area where we can lock arms on this is in the classroom. I think, and in fact, even though it was broadly a progressive school, one of the ones that I am glad I put my son in was a Waldorf school, because it did that for us. So I actually chose that actively for my son. When we moved to Texas, we put him in a Waldorf school. The school had you shall not, if you are attending this school, use media, including like recorded music, not just at school, but at home. You signed that is what you're going to do.
Yeah,
and we were on the more compliant. Nobody was perfect.
Yes.
But we were pretty compliant. We were more compliant than average in that school.
Yes.
And the benefits to my son, I can't overstate. He played with physical toys.
Yes. Wonderful.
Older for a longer period of time. I remember he had like a 10th or 11th, let's see. Yeah, I think like 9, 10 years old. He was running around in the green belts, whacking his friends with swords.
Yeah, great.
When everybody else was just zombified to screens. So
zombified. That's the word, zombified.
So I think we're on the same page more broadly. And the question is just like, at the end of the day, it's like, where must sovereignty and control reside on these things? And it's going to be hard. And I don't disagree with you that it is hard on a macro scale. And I'm open-minded to the potential that this is more that something. This might be a ground where the cost to the freedom, undermine the future of the freedom itself. I am open to that. I think maybe that's the best way I could say, like, maybe what your argument is that this is a freedom that is like a snake that will eat its own tail.
That's it. That's exactly what I'm saying. And it's not that I don't take what you're saying seriously. I do live in Britain. I get it. I really get it. But we got to live in hope. And that is what we're doing. And Dad Saves America and Strictly Education, we're trying to spread the word to change people's mind on the ground. That's what we try and do.
As we start to come to the end of our conversation, one of the things that you have been loud against is this idea of gentle parenting. And you've referenced it a little offhandedly in here. But what is gentle parenting and why does it suck?
Well, everything that we've been talking about, holding the line, telling kids off and so on, they don't do. Gentle parenting is all about speaking to your child like he's a rational human being, which is just crazy. 2-year-olds are not rational. They're 2. They have tantrums for seemingly no reason.
They have tantrums a lot longer than 2, by the way.
Yes, no, indeed. I mean, the fact of the matter is you've got to use praise and punishment, the old-fashioned kind of values that your grandmother knew. Gentle parenting is very much the opposite to that, where you let things slide and it's mean to tell your child off and you want to be gentle. The clue is in the title, That is to ruin your child. It's just to ruin your child. I'm afraid that this idea that you can be friends with your children is just wrong. You can either be friends with your children when they are children or when they are adults. You have to choose. It's very simple. And if you are friendly, I'm not talking, I'm saying you think of yourselves as equals when they are children. If you think in that way, you are never going to like them when they are adults. The way in which you are friends with your kids when they are adults, it's because you took charge of them when they were children.
This touches on something that I consider to be a fundamental question of everything I do. It's at the heart in some ways of Dad Saves America, which is, what does it mean to be an adult? I feel like this is something that our society has literally forgotten. Like there is, it's a norm that if you asked any random person on the street in 1950, they would give an answer that was pretty similar and correct. And today, it's like, oh, I do my own laundry or something. But there's no notion of it in the rich fullness of like what I think is our responsibility as parents, which is our goal is to raise adults who will then survive, procreate, produce grandchildren, live fulfilling, happy lives. How do you understand what adulthood is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was just reading today The Desecration of Man by Carl Trueman. And, he basically is making the argument that without God, it's very difficult to know what man is meant to be, because man was made in the image of God. And if you understand that man was made in the image of God and that man exists with obligations and man has to rest on certain, on other people, on God, in order to achieve things within a controlled environment where he is obligated to other people. If you don't understand that, and if instead you've rejected God, his argument is that you're then just sort of floating around and that anything goes and that you are your own God. And then what is it to be a man? Well, just do whatever you want, really, which is a bit of a problem. And that is where we are in 2026. You know, we have this whole mentality, which is that I should be able to live my best life and do what I want to do, which is just all wrong. You know, I've got a lovely quote here from somebody which says, "Real character is formed not by having an abundance of choices, but in accepting definite limitations in commitments made and promises kept." You know, like, it's not about just, I've got a million choices, I get to do whatever I like. It's no, I've made commitments, I've made promises, I've got relationships, I've got obligations, and therefore I have to sacrifice and alter myself accordingly. These are all small c conservative values that we've just completely lost. And I suppose Carl Truman would argue that is because God is dead, and we killed him. So
and Nietzsche would, I think, argue that, right?
Yes. He talks about Nietzsche, and he talks about, just how he makes the argument. I'm not making the argument, but he makes the argument that without God, that we're all just a bit lost, really, because we're unanchored. There's nothing to hold us, you know?
I believe that. I believe that fundamentally it is not how I always thought. So yeah. We've talked about this sort of offline, but I've certainly become far more interested and engaged in my Catholic faith, and it has become very much the center of my understanding of the world. And I think I can't escape. So Tom Holland he's got this book, Dominion. I think we've talked about this. It does seem like the classical liberal idea of liberty, and America, I think, embraced this with more gusto than anywhere in the world. The individual liberty as an inalienable right. But it's really hard to make the argument for that, for sovereignty, in a world where there's no creation. I don't understand. The argument falls apart to me. The argument that, like, well, we're just the greatest good for the greatest many, like this utilitarian argument. Like Jeremy Bentham, the utilitarian philosopher, called the idea of rights nonsense on stilts. And to some extent, maybe legally, rights are kind of nonsense. Rights are only that which you can defend. So so that's, God doesn't come down and slay people who violate your rights. Like, you have to sort of slay them yourself or have somebody do it.
Because we have agency.
But the idea that you can have the thing that we call the West, I feel like another way of putting it is, we might be a cut flower society if the majority of the West ceases to believe in God.
I know. We're in trouble. We are in trouble.
What do we do about that? How do you think about that?
I don't know. I read books like Desecration of Man. I don't know. We all are on our own journey, and we read and we think and we talk to each other like you and I are talking now.
Did you see the Odyssey movie yet? The Nolan
No,
Odyssey?
But I've seen you arguing for it over and over and over again on Twitter. So I do want to go and see it. Mainly because of you. Because you heard us there. You got to see this, and you get so angry about it all.
I wouldn't say I get that angry. So let's actually, do your kids read the Odyssey?
No, they do not. No.
Okay, let's talk about this. So number one, here you are talking about tradition. Why don't your kids read the Odyssey?
Because you got to pick and choose. I mean, so we're all about tradition, but there's a whole load of traditional novels and books that they can read. And the Odyssey isn't one of them.
Why do you think this has ignited such a storm beyond just the stupid casting of Ellen Page and whatnot? Because this has lingered. And I made my case earlier in a Friday video that I thought the film I thought the film was a masterpiece. I acknowledge its stupid woke casting flaws, but I actually thought fundamentally the film, to the extent that it diverted from the Odyssey original text, it was still very much in the Western and Greek tragic tradition. So, like, it is not anti-Greek tragedy to have a protagonist who's deeply reflexive about the horrors of war and worried that maybe he's made himself a villain in what he's done to get where he's gotten. That's in the Iliad. It's in other tragedies that come later. A lot of the online right has basically, and a lot of my viewers, it's one of the lowest ranked videos of recent months, and I knew it would be. They're like, "No, it's woke. You shut up." I guess how do you teach this Western, the aspects of the Western canon? Why didn't the Odyssey make the cut? And how do you think about it as an educator who cares about the Western tradition and talks about Western civilization? I'm actually surprised you don't have your kids read it. Tell me about that.
We do the Greek myths generally, like just a whole load of different Greek myths. I mean, not the Odyssey. It's a big thing, isn't it? I mean, and there's, one has to choose. That's what I would say for anything. There's a whole number of different. You could say, why don't we do King Lear? Well, you have to choose. So I would say that in the first instance with regard to us. With regard to this film, I don't know. I mean, I've read both people on the left and on the right about it. People who loved it, people who don't like it. I can understand why the people who don't like it don't like it. I get it. I also get why you might like it on, those who like it. I mean, I don't know. I have to go and see it. It's hard for me to say because I haven't seen it. So,
but steering away from the film particularly, since you haven't seen it yet, how? I think this is an area where Michaela diverges maybe a little more, the most strikingly perhaps, from classical schools, which steep themselves in the great books in the older grades in particular. So where does that? Because I think for a lot of people in the States, probably some of the places that are going to be closest to the things you talk about are going to be classical schools.
Yes.
So engage that. Where do you diverge from the classical, which is this trivium of we're at the end of 2 hours, so my brain's getting a little foggy. But
yes,
they have a sort of trivium sequence of grammar, logic, rhetoric, I think is the sequence, and you're not quite that. So.
No. So I think sometimes some of the schools that consider themselves perhaps classical, or the schools that, and good for them, who have real respect for the intellectual journey that a child might take, and they want to make, they want to open up a world of challenge for them. Sometimes they can make it so that the challenge is so much that the child is not actually accessing very much at all. So sometimes you go into a classical school, you can see children trying to read Dostoevsky, but it's just too hard. So they're sort of sat there looking at it, but they're not really able to grasp what's in it because it's just too hard for them. So it's important to choose literature that they can access at the right stages, at the different stages, depending on whether they're 11 or they're 16 and so on. You just need to be careful about that. And we're always very careful about that. It's also the case that we would spend time on a novel. We wouldn't just tick. We're not thinking tick, 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 we've done these things. It's very much, well, what have they learned from this? It's a different way of seeing things. And I wouldn't say that all classical schools do something else. There will be many classical schools that do something similar to what we're doing. But I wouldn't say that what I've just said is necessarily the core to what classical schooling is about. They don't think in that way.
When I think about it, because I went to a traditional Catholic K through 12 school, and I graduated from high school in 96. So I don't think there was anything particularly unique about the curriculum relative to the public school. It was basic. And in fact, I think one of the criticisms that could be leveled against the Catholic school system, at least in the US, is that it too closely mirrors the public system.
Right.
in a lot of ways. I think one of the opportunities for renewal in this country on the education front is actually for Catholic schools, which I think are the largest non-governmental school system, to be more Catholic and to be more traditional and to embrace all that involves, and to stop feeling like they have to basically be the public school system with Friday Mass. But one of the things that is hard is that I'm like re-engaging these texts, these ideas as an adult, including the Odyssey. Like, the movie's been great for me because it's like, oh my gosh, I did read the Odyssey in English class, I want to say in freshman or sophomore year, and I know for a fact that I didn't get anything near out of it that I'm getting out of re-engaging it now.
Well, and why is that?
It's a good question.
Well, I would say it's because well, depending. I don't know what your teacher was like and what happened then. But the fact of the matter is that life has taught you all sorts of things. You've been taught to see the world in various different ways and how to change your mind about things. And so when you go to the Odyssey now, you're bringing a whole host of ideas to it to be able to pull it apart and really understand it. When you're younger, if you are trying to access texts that the maturity level, your maturity level isn't quite there, and you're here, and the text is there, you'll read it and you'll tick a box, but you won't really get that much out of it. So one has to be careful. Now, that's not to say, look, there are abridged versions of things. There are versions of books which are made much easier for kids to be able to access classical texts and so on. So I'm not against that idea, but one needs to think very carefully. And I would just warn people, it's not just about, hey, let's just teach the classics. You need to be careful about how you're doing it and when, that's all.
How do you think about the transformation that's taken place in terms of capacity for our kids? So one of the things that I will encounter sometimes, and I haven't like looked at it really deeply. So I'll get these anecdotal things someone will tell me, and they'll be shocking. Like, I was just this weekend with somebody who's like a real super brain polymath named Chris, and he said that he was looking back at there was this, like, the equivalent of there's these readers, I forget the name of them now, but there was like a math equivalent of this McGuffey something reader that was broadly used in America throughout education. And he said, if you look at the math that they were learning in like 9th grade, it is like college level math. And like this was the broad curriculum. The level of rigor that our grandparents as kids, if they were in school, were getting is shocking. And you hear this with literature and with like kid, like that. It seems like we asked more of our kids in prior generations with regard to rigor, but to an even more extreme degree than most people even like realize. Is that actually true?
Yes, 100%. 100%. I mean, the thing is that we don't know how to teach anymore. I mean, but that's a whole long conversation, but we don't know how to teach. And obviously that strictly education, I'll be looking at exactly that sort of thing. We don't know how to make sure that kids get taught properly. And what I was just explaining was you have to pitch it correctly. And that takes, I mean, that's a lot of hard work. And that, that requires a longer conversation. But you need to pitch it correctly and you need to value knowledge. And I would say that across the political spectrum these days, we don't value knowledge at all because we don't understand it. We don't understand what children need. And that ultimately is why Strictly is required, I think, because, well, I'll be explaining weekly what it is children need.
And just to, as we come to an end, because that's a perfect way to segue, what can people expect and who should be looking forward to signing up to see you every week on Strictly Education?
Well, I, of course, think everybody should sign up because children are everything. Children are the future. all of us should care about children. So even if you're not a parent or you're not a teacher, you should care about kids. If you care about your country, you should care about kids. And I promise you, what Strictly is going to offer something that you just won't find elsewhere, because it will always be from the point of view of children. And you'll be able to take what you learn from Strictly and then apply it to the way in which you have discussions about other philosophical ideas, political ideas. Over time, Strictly will change your mind about things. So give it a go, is what I'd say.
Katharine Birbalsingh, Strictly Education. It is exciting to have you part of the Emergent Order team. It is one of the highlights of the past 2 years, getting to know you. I encourage everybody, if you're subscribed to Dad Saves America and you like this channel, you have to go over, click the subscribe button at Strictly Education. This will be linked up as a collaboration down below. Thank you for coming back to Dad Saves America.
Well, thanks for having me, John. And I can't wait. Really happy to be part of the team.